Welcome, and thank you for joining the Dreamtime Discoveries. Tonight, as you settle into a comfortable spot and let the day fade into the background, we are going to drift into a gentle exploration of how the moon moves the tides. That soft glow in the sky, something so constant and familiar, has the power to pull entire oceans. It is a quiet force, working without sound, shaping the rhythms of our world. Before we begin, I would love to know where you are listening from. Are you by the sea, where the tides rise and fall each day? Or perhaps you are far inland, imagining the distant pull of the moon across the water. Share your corner of the world in the comments. It is always fascinating to see the reach of this little journey we take together. And if you find these videos calming, a gentle way to end your day, please consider giving this one a like and subscribing to the channel. To those of you who have already subscribed, thank you. You are the reason these quiet explorations keep flowing like a tide of their own. I hope this video does not prove so interesting that it keeps you wide awake. But if it does, then perhaps it is some comfort to know that while sleep is delayed, at least the moon may be teaching you something as you listen. So, as the night deepens and the moon climbs a little higher, let us ask a simple question with a surprisingly profound answer. How can something so distant move the very seas of our planet? The tides might seem like an ordinary part of the background world. Waves arriving, waves retreating, the shore slowly breathing in and out. Yet, beneath that steady rhythm lies one of the most elegant demonstrations of physics at work. The moon, silent and silver above us, is not just a companion lighting our night sky. It is a sculptor of oceans, a conductor guiding vast bodies of water with its invisible hand. Understanding the tides is like unraveling a layered story. It is not only about gravity, though gravity is the main character. It is about the spin of the earth, the pull of the sun, the shapes of the seas themselves, and even the tilt of continents that channel water into unique patterns. The rise and fall of the tide is not a simple pulse, but a complex dance played out on every shore. For ancient peoples, this rhythm was a mystery tinged with awe. The ocean seemed to listen to the moon as though obeying some celestial command. Sailors timed their voyages to the cycles of high and low water. Fishermen waited for the tides to turn before casting their nets, and poets found in their ebb and flow a perfect metaphor for change. Even today, though we can predict the tides with satellites and supercomputers, the feeling remains that the oceans are alive, moving to the music of the moon. And tides do more than shape coastlines or dictate the daily rhythm of beaches. They have influenced the course of life itself. Early organisms evolved in the intertidal zones where water came and went, forcing them to adapt or perish. Even the slow drift of the moon away from Earth, a process measured in mere centimeters each year, continues to reshape our planet's future. In this journey, we will not only explore the science behind tides, but also the culture, the history, and the quiet poetry they bring. By the end, the next time you see the moon hanging above the horizon, you may feel its pull a little differently, knowing that it is not just a light in the sky. It is the reason the ocean breathes. So, let us begin by stepping into the mystery itself. What exactly is the moon doing to the Earth that makes oceans rise and fall like a sleeping giant's breath? Gravity is one of those quiet forces that rarely makes a fuss. But without it, the universe would be nothing more than a lonely scatter of particles drifting aimlessly. Every planet, every star, every person resting their head on a pillow right now is bound together by this invisible thread. The moon, hanging serenely in the night sky, is bound to Earth by that same force, and in return, it tugs delicately on the oceans below. This is where the story of the tides truly begins. To picture what is happening, imagine Earth wrapped in an enormous, flexible oceanic blanket. The moon's gravity reaches out and pulls that blanket ever so slightly toward it. The result is a bulge of water on the side of Earth that faces the moon. But here is the surprising part. there is also a bulge on the opposite side of the planet, as though the oceans are stretching in two directions at once. It is as if the Earth were a ball being gently squeezed in the middle, with the water at either end puffing outward. This might sound counterintuitive at first. Why would the oceans bulge on the far side away from the moon's pull? The explanation lies in the balance of forces. On the near side, the moon's gravity is stronger, pulling the water toward it. On the far side, however, the water is being flung outward because it is not pulled quite as strongly as the solid Earth itself. The Earth is essentially pulled a little harder than the distant ocean water, creating a relative effect that pushes the water outward. It is a strange dance of attraction and inertia, like two partners tugging on opposite ends of a rope. If you are imagining all the water sloshing around like soup in a tilted bowl, it is worth pausing. The oceans are vast, and they cannot simply spill from one end of the planet to the other every 12 hours. Instead, the tides are subtle but immense. The bulges caused by the moon's pull are only a meter or so high in the open ocean. What turns them into dramatic rises and falls of several meters along coasts is the shape of the land, the depth of the water, and the way those bulges are funneled by geography. But at the heart of it all is the gentle hand of gravity pulling on trillions of tons of seawater. Now, why does inertia matter here? Inertia is the tendency of things to keep doing what they are already doing. A car keeps rolling forward, even when you take your foot off the pedal. A spinning top keeps twirling until friction slows it down. And the oceans, being unimaginably massive, resist sudden changes. While the moon pulls at the water, Earth itself is also spinning beneath those bulges. It takes about 24 hours for Earth to complete a rotation. And during that time, any given patch of coastline will move under first one bulge, then the other. This is why most places on Earth experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides each. You might think of it as a cosmic conveyor belt. The tidal bulges are roughly fixed relative to the moon, but because Earth spins, coastlines move through them, experiencing the rise and fall as the hours pass. If Earth were not rotating, the bulges would simply sit in place, and life on the planet would be very different indeed. Thankfully, we are granted this steady rhythm, a lunar heartbeat that quietly marks the passage of time along every shore. Of course, the reality is slightly messier than the neat picture of 2 perfect bulges. Earth is not a smooth ball, and the oceans do not cover it evenly. Continents block the flow of water. Ocean basins trap and amplify movements, and local geography warps the tide into all sorts of shapes. Yet no matter how distorted the rhythm becomes, its source remains the same, the moon's gravitational embrace. It is astonishing to realize that such a small celestial body exerts such an influence. The moon is only about 1/6 the size of Earth and has just 1/80th of its mass. Yet, because it is relatively close, roughly 380,000 kilometers away, it has a profound effect on our planet. The sun, far larger and more massive, also influences tides, but its effect is weaker because distance diminishes gravity's tug. The moon, being our closest neighbor, is the one that gives the oceans their regular rhythm. The science of tides can sometimes sound intimidating, but at its core, it is a story of balance. Gravity pulls, inertia resists, and the rotation of Earth complicates the pattern. The result is not chaos, but a graceful order. The oceans respond as if they are listening to a conductor's baton, following a score written in invisible lines of force, stretching between Earth and moon. For those who like analogies, picture standing in a crowded dance hall. Someone gives the signal, and the crowd begins to sway in time with the music. Each person may move differently, depending on where they stand, but the collective rhythm flows through them all. The moon is that signal, and the oceans are the dancers. It may not be a perfect waltz. Sometimes it is more like a shuffle, but the beat is steady, and the partners never tire. There is something wonderfully humbling in this. The same gravitational force that keeps your feet on the ground is on a planetary scale, pulling at entire oceans. You could be standing on a beach, watching waves lap at your toes, and those very waves are being influenced by the moon floating silently above. The connection is both ordinary and extraordinary, a reminder that we are part of a vast system where even the quietest forces ripple outward. One might ask, if the moon pulls on the oceans, why does it not pull us upward as well? After all, you too are made mostly of water. The answer is scale. The difference in gravitational pull across the height of a human body is far too small to notice. The oceans, however, cover the planet and are free to shift, making them sensitive to even slight differences. So, while your evening cup of tea will not start sloshing in rhythm with the tides, the great seas will always respond. And here lies the charm of the moon's gravitational embrace. It is not a violent force. It does not whip the oceans into storms or send waves crashing over mountains. Instead, it is a patient tug, a gentle insistence that water must rise and fall in a rhythm as old as the earth itself. In that rhythm, civilizations have lived, creatures have evolved, and coastlines have been carved. The story of the tides begins with this invisible pull, a force so subtle that it goes unnoticed most of the time, yet so powerful that it sculpts the daily life of the planet. Every high tide and every low tide is a quiet reminder that gravity never sleeps, and that the moon, far from being a distant ornament in the night sky, is a partner bound to us, guiding the oceans with its unseen hand. Our journey into the moon's effect on Earth is not just a scientific one. It is a story of connection. The tides are a daily, visible testament to the fact that we are not isolated on our planet. We are part of a larger, cosmic dance. The gravitational pull of the moon, which is the very reason for the rise and fall of the seas, is a constant, though subtle, reminder of our place in the solar system. This pull is not just a force of nature. It is a dialogue between two celestial bodies. The moon and the earth, bound together, perform a synchronized movement that has shaped our world since its very beginning. The rhythms of the tide have guided ancient civilizations, shaped the evolution of life in the intertidal zones, and continue to influence the daily lives of millions of people who live by the sea. They are at once the evidence of its power and the poetry of its presence. To sit by the sea and watch the tide roll in is therefore to witness more than water moving. It is to see the whole story of earth and moon enacted before your eyes. It is to glimpse the invisible strings of gravity that tie planet and satellite together. It is to feel in the sound of waves, the passage of deep time, and the persistence of cosmic rhythms. It is to understand that the moon, far away and silent, is intimately present in every grain of wet sand. And in the end, there is comfort in this constancy. Empires may crumble, climates may shift, technologies may rise and fall, but the tide will still answer to the moon. The waves will still breathe in and out, keeping a rhythm that outlasts generations. To listen to the sea is to hear the earth itself in conversation with the sky. It is a reminder that the universe is not chaos alone, but also pattern, order, and enduring relationship. So when you next hear the water advancing up ashore or slipping quietly back again, pause for a moment. That motion is more than waves. It is the echo of the moon's embrace, the steady heartbeat of a planet guided by its companion. The moon is not just a light in the night sky. It is a patient sculptor, a guardian of oceans, a keeper of rhythms, and a shaper of time. And as long as it continues to pull, the seas will continue to answer, rising and falling in their eternal conversation with the shore. If you have ever spent a day by the sea, you may have noticed something curious. The shoreline is never still. The water creeps forward to cover rocks and sand, then slowly retreats again, exposing tidal pools and leaving seaweed draped across the shore. This rise and fall is not a one-off event, but a repeating cycle as steady as a clock, with most coasts experiencing 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. The daily tide cycle is one of Earth's most reliable rhythms, written into the turning of the planet and the steady pull of the moon. To understand why the pattern works this way, imagine Earth as a spinning globe wrapped in 2 watery bulges, one facing the moon and one on the far side. As the Earth rotates, any given location on its surface moves through those bulges. When a coastline is aligned with the bulge, the tide is high. When it is between the bulges, the tide is low. Since Earth takes roughly 24 hours to complete a full spin, a place will pass through both bulges and both troughs in that time, giving 2 high tides and 2 low tides. This is what scientists call a semi-diurnal tide, meaning half day. But things are never quite that simple. Because the moon is also moving around Earth, the cycle does not reset exactly every 24 hours. Instead, the tides arrive on a lunar schedule, which is a little longer. High tide at a particular beach today will not occur at precisely the same clock time tomorrow. Instead, it will be about 50 minutes later. This small difference comes from the fact that as Earth rotates, the moon itself has shifted a little on its orbit, and the oceans must catch up to its new position. For those who live by the water, this slow drifting of the tide schedule is a familiar rhythm, one that links daily life to the movements of the heavens. Semidiurnal tides are the most common pattern, shaping coastlines across much of the world. The Atlantic Ocean is a classic example where places like Boston, Lisbon, and Dakar all see 2 highs and 2 lows in a regular sequence. If you were to stand on the pier in Boston Harbor, you could watch the tide rise and fall by several meters twice a day, revealing muddy flats at low tide and hiding them beneath water at high tide. Yet not every coast follows this neat rule. Some places experience diurnal tides with only 1 high tide and 1 low tide in each day. This happens when the geometry of the ocean basin and the pull of the moon combine in such a way that one of the tidal bulges dominates. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the best-known examples. In places like Pensacola, Florida, the sea rises once and falls once each day, as if the ocean had decided to prefer a simpler schedule. For those living there, the pattern is just as predictable, though very different from the twice-daily rhythm elsewhere. Then there are mixed tides, a kind of in-between rhythm where the 2 high tides are not equal in height. The Pacific coast of North America is a striking example. In San Diego, California, 1 high tide may tower over the other, leaving beachgoers and fishermen with a more complex timetable to follow. Mixed tides remind us that the ocean is not governed by neat equations alone, but by a blend of physics and geography, where local shapes and depths bend the rhythm into unique forms. The variety of tides across the world highlights how sensitive the oceans are to their surroundings. The moon and the sun provide the pull, but the way that pull is expressed depends on the basins that hold the water. Narrow inlets, wide shelves, deep troughs, and even the resonance of waves bouncing within a bay can all modify the cycle. In some harbors, tides may be exaggerated into dramatic rises and falls. In others, they may be muted until they are barely noticeable. For people who live by the sea, these cycles are not abstract ideas, but daily realities. Fishermen along the Atlantic coast plan their departures and returns by the tide tables. In parts of Southeast Asia, entire floating markets rise and fall with the water, adjusting their activity to the rhythm of the sea. In Northern Europe, walking across mud flats at low tide is a traditional activity, but one that requires a careful eye on the clock because the returning tide is steady and unrelenting. The daily cycle of tides is also an excellent reminder that while Earth's rotation is constant, the relationship with the moon adds layers of complexity. The ocean is not a passive blanket of water, but a dynamic system responding to the smaller shifts in timing and alignment. This is why predicting tides requires more than a simple glance at the sky. Even today, with satellites and computers, local observations remain crucial for accuracy. It is also worth noting that the tide does not rise and fall like a switch being flipped. Instead, it moves gradually with currents flowing in and out of bays, harbors, and estuaries. These tidal currents can be strong enough to shape coastlines, carry nutrients to marine ecosystems, and even create challenges for ships. Asterisk, in some areas, the incoming tide rushes inland like a river in reverse, while the outgoing tide drains vast stretches of land in a matter of hours. Despite all these variations, the basic pattern remains consistent. Two bulges of water created by the moon's pull and Earth's rotation sweep around the globe. Most coasts meet both bulges each day. Some meet only one, and others meet them unevenly. The result is a planet where no shoreline is ever truly still, but always breathing in and out in a rhythm tied to the sky. There is a certain beauty in this universality. Whether you're standing on a rocky shore in Ireland, a sandy beach in Florida, or a tidal flat in Japan, the cycle connects you to the same moon. Even if the heights and timings differ, the principle is the same. Earth and its oceans are bound to their companion in space, and every day that bond is written in the rise and fall of the sea. It is easy to overlook the tides, to think of them as background scenery to a walk along the coast. Yet once you understand the daily cycle, you start to see them differently. Each wave that creeps higher onto the sand, each stretch of beach that vanishes beneath the water, is part of a pattern shaped by cosmic forces. The moon is never silent, even when it appears still. It is always tugging, always guiding, and the oceans are always listening. The daily tide cycle is therefore more than a curiosity of physics. It is a connection between the turning of the planet, the orbit of the moon, and the lived experience of people across the world. It reminds us that even the most ordinary sights, like water rising and falling on the shore, are part of a much larger story written in gravity and motion. And perhaps that is what makes it so quietly remarkable. A clock that does not tick but breathes. The moon may be the star of the tidal story, but it does not dance alone. Hovering in the background, far more massive, yet much more distant, the sun also exerts its pull on Earth's oceans. Although it is almost 400 times farther away than the moon, its gravitational influence is powerful enough to join the rhythm of the tides. What makes this duet fascinating is not just the sheer scale of it, but the way the sun and the moon sometimes work in harmony and sometimes gently cancel one another out. The result is a pattern of stronger and weaker tides that repeat with comforting regularity. To begin, picture the Earth, the moon, and the sun lined up in a straight row. This happens during two familiar lunar phases: the new moon, when the moon sits between Earth and the sun, and the full moon, when Earth sits between the two. In either case, the gravitational forces of the sun and the moon align, tugging the oceans in the same direction. The result is what we call a spring tide. Despite the name, this has nothing to do with the season of spring. The word comes from the idea of the tide springing forth with unusual strength. During a spring tide, high tides are higher and low tides are lower, creating a more dramatic range. If you were to stand on the coast during a spring tide, you might notice the water climbing higher up the beach than usual, or draining further back during low tide, revealing stretches of sand and rock rarely seen. Fishermen and sailors through history have known these days well, timing their activities to take advantage of the stronger flows. Even today, spring tides can shape coastal life, influencing everything from the behavior of crabs and shellfish to the timing of harbor operations. Now, imagine a different alignment. The moon is at its first quarter, or last quarter phase, appearing as a half-lit disk in the night sky. In this position, the sun and moon are at right angles to one another with respect to Earth. They're gravitational. Poles are not combining, but competing, each tugging the oceans in different directions. The result is a neap tide. Here, the range between high and low water is much smaller than usual. High tides do not reach as high and low tides do not fall as far. The ocean, in effect, is caught between two bosses giving contradictory instructions, and the result is a compromise. Neap tides bring their own quiet fascination. They occur about a week after a spring tide, creating a steady 2-week rhythm in which the strength of the tide waxes and wanes. For coastal communities, this rhythm has long been a natural calendar. Strong spring tides might be ideal for launching boats in shallow waters, while gentler neap tides could make certain crossings easier or expose tidal flats for gathering shellfish. Nature also responds. In estuaries, fish and crabs time their movements to these cycles, maximizing their chances of survival in the ever-changing landscape of salt and sand. The interplay between sun and moon illustrates something profound about gravity. It is not a switch that turns on and off, but a constant force that can add or subtract depending on geometry. The sun's gravitational pull on Earth is enormous. Yet because it is so distant, the difference in pull between the near and far sides of Earth is smaller than the difference created by the moon. This is why the moon is the main driver of tides. But when the two forces line up, their combined influence becomes undeniable. One of the remarkable aspects of spring and neap tides is their predictability. Unlike storms or winds, which can change without warning, these cycles are locked to the lunar phases. Astronomers in ancient civilizations could forecast them with surprising accuracy simply by watching the shape of the moon. Even without modern instruments, farmers and fishermen knew that a full or new moon would bring especially strong tides, while a half moon would bring the weakest. This knowledge was passed down through generations, woven into traditions and folklore. Modern science has refined these predictions to extraordinary precision. Tide tables today can tell you not only the times of high and low water, but also the expected height years into the future. Yet, behind all the data and algorithms lies the same simple truth. Two celestial bodies working together or against one another in their pull on the oceans. The cosmic choreography of sun and moon is as dependable as a heartbeat and just as vital to life on Earth. For many, the most striking reminder of spring tides comes when they combine with other forces. During a storm, when strong winds drive water toward the shore, a spring tide can make flooding far worse, pushing water levels to dangerous extremes. Conversely, during a neap tide, the weaker range may help buffer against surges, at least a little. These interactions highlight how tides are never isolated, but part of a wider system of weather, geography, and celestial mechanics. There is also a poetic quality to the idea that the sun, the great giver of light and warmth, joins the moon in shaping the seas. Though we tend to think of the sun's influence as blazing and immediate, its gravitational hand is subtle, reaching across vast emptiness to nudge the water. The moon may be the closer partner, but the sun ensures that the dance of the tides is rich with variation, never repeating itself exactly in the same way. In some cultures, this cosmic partnership has been celebrated in myth. The sun and moon are often seen as opposing siblings, lovers, or rivals locked in an eternal relationship that shapes the world below. When their forces align, the ocean responds with great surges. When they oppose each other, the sea becomes calmer. Though ancient storytellers lacked the equations of physics, their imagination captured the essence of what we now measure with science. Standing on a beach during a spring tide, watching waves reach further than expected, one cannot help but feel a connection to these celestial alignments. The sight is not just a quirk of geography, but a direct consequence of cosmic geometry. Every ripple that laps at the shore is part of a story being written by two distant bodies moving in their predictable paths. The moon provides the steady rhythm, while the sun adds a second beat, turning the simple pulse of tides into something more like a melody. And so the daily rise and fall of the ocean is not only the work of one celestial neighbor, but the result of a duet. The moon leads, but the sun joins, sometimes amplifying, sometimes softening, always ensuring that the oceans never quite repeat themselves from one day to the next. The cycle of spring and neap tides gives texture to the rhythm of the sea, a slow alternation of strength and gentleness that has shaped ecosystems, guided human activity, and added depth to the endless conversation between earth and sky. The tides are often described as the work of the moon and the sun, but the oceans themselves have a great deal to say in the matter. The shape of Earth's seas, the outline of its coasts, and even the hidden depths of the seabed determine how those celestial tugs are expressed. If the moon provides the rhythm, the oceans are the instruments. And just like violins, drums, or flutes, each basin produces its own sound. Some coasts boom with dramatic rises and falls, while others barely whisper a change. One of the most famous demonstrations of this is the Bay of Fundy, located between the Canadian provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. This long, funnel-shaped bay is legendary for having the highest tidal range in the world. Water there can rise and fall by more than 15 meters, which is taller than a 5-story building. When the tide rushes in, it fills the bay like a giant bathtub being tipped. And when it recedes, vast mud flats stretch into the distance. The secret lies in resonance. The Bay of Fundy's natural period of oscillation happens to match the timing of the tides. So each new surge of water arrives just as the previous one is sloshing back, amplifying the effect like a swing being pushed at just the right moment. Contrast this with the Mediterranean Sea. Though it is bordered by many countries and cultures, its tides are almost unnoticeable. In most places, the difference between high and low water is only a few centimeters. That is because the Mediterranean is nearly landlocked, connected to the Atlantic by the narrow Strait of Gibraltar. The tidal bulges from the moon and sun cannot easily enter, and the basin itself does not resonate strongly with their timing. As a result, the Mediterranean seems to shrug off the moon's pull, its surface remaining calm, while the rest of the world's oceans heave and sigh. In between these extremes are countless variations. The English Channel, with its narrowing funnel shape, magnifies the tide and creates powerful tidal currents. Ports like St. Malo in France have tides so high that harbor walls had to be designed to keep ships afloat even at low water. Across the Atlantic, the estuaries of Britain also show dramatic changes, with rivers swelling and draining in step with the sea. Meanwhile, the Gulf of Mexico produces relatively small tides, usually less than half a meter, because its broad, rounded basin does not line up with the natural period of the tidal forces. Even the United States Pacific coast demonstrates striking contrasts. In Alaska, where narrow inlets cut deep into the land, tides can reach over 10 meters. Yet further south in California, the range is more modest, usually just a meter or two. The difference lies in the shapes of bays, shelves, and channels, which either amplify the incoming tide or allow it to disperse. These geographic quirks make each stretch of coastline unique, giving local communities distinct experiences of the same cosmic forces. Resonance plays a particularly fascinating role. Just as a child's swing soars higher when pushed in rhythm, certain bays and gulfs slosh dramatically when the timing of the tides matches their natural period. The Bay of Fundy is the textbook case, but similar effects occur in the Bristol Channel in Britain and in parts of Argentina's coast. When the timing is off, however, the push from the moon and sun does not line up with the basin's rhythm, and the result is muted. This is why two coasts at the same latitude can have utterly different tidal experiences. The seabed itself also matters. Shallow continental shelves allow tidal waves to build in height as they slow down, much like a line of traffic piling up near a bottleneck. Deeper waters, by contrast, let tidal energy pass with little fuss. That is why tides are most dramatic along continental margins and estuaries, while the open ocean sees only gentle swells of a meter or so. It is not that the moon forgets the middle of the sea, but that the energy has more room to spread. In narrow rivers and estuaries, tides can transform into tidal bores, waves that surge upstream against the current. The Severn River in England and the Qiantang River in China both produce famous examples where walls of water rush inland with impressive force. These spectacles remind us that tides are not just vertical movements of water, but also horizontal flows capable of reshaping entire landscapes and ecosystems. Globally, scientists map tides using satellites and networks of coastal gauges. The patterns are complex, with amphitromic points, locations in the ocean where the tide barely changes at all, surrounded by regions where the tide circles around like a slow whirlpool. These points exist because the tidal wave, constrained by continents, reflects and interferes with itself, creating standing patterns. To the untrained eye, the map of global tides looks less like neat stripes and more like a painter's swirl of colors. Evidence of how geography sculpts the moon's simple pull into a world of variety. For coastal communities, these differences are not just curiosities, but daily realities. In places with extreme tides, like parts of Canada or Northern Europe, harbors are engineered with gates and locks to keep water levels manageable. Fishermen plan carefully around the rapid rise and fall, and entire ecosystems flourish on mudflats exposed at low tide. In more placid regions like the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, tides are barely a consideration, and life carries on with little thought for the moon's tug. The contrast is a reminder of how interconnected the forces are. Gravity provides the universal rule, but Earth's irregular surface translates it into a local expression. It is like hearing a single melody played on 100 different instruments. The tune is the same, but the sound changes depending on who plays it. The moon, consistent in its orbit, gives the signal, but each ocean and bay interprets it in its own way. This is part of the quiet wonder of the tides. They are not simply predictable rises and falls, but a collaboration between sky and earth, between gravity and geography. When standing on a cliff above a roaring tidal channel or sitting on a calm Mediterranean shore, it is easy to forget that the same moon is responsible for both. The difference lies in the shape of the water below, the hidden contours of the planet itself. The story of tides is therefore not just about celestial mechanics, but also about Earth's own character. Continents, shelves, and basins shape the response, amplifying or damping the effect, creating drama in one place and subtlety in another. Each coastline tells its own version of the lunar tale, and together they form a global chorus, varied but harmonious, each voice shaped by the ocean's shape. Long before science offered neat explanations with gravity and orbital mechanics, human beings stood on the edges of the sea and wondered why the waters came and went. To those early eyes, the connection between the moon and the tides must have seemed both obvious and mysterious. The moon appeared in the sky, and the waters responded, swelling and sinking with a rhythm as steady as breathing. Without equations or satellites, people explained this rhythm in the language they knew best, stories of gods, spirits, and cosmic forces. In Mesopotamia, one of the cradles of civilization, the moon was more than just a light in the night sky. It was personified as the god Sin or Nana, a powerful deity associated with cycles of time and fertility. The movement of water was easily woven into this divine rhythm. The rivers of the Tigris-Euphrates swelled and retreated with the seasons, and the moon became a clock in the heavens, a ruler of cycles, both earthly and celestial. To the people of this land, the waxing and waning of the lunar disk was as much a divine act as it was a natural one. a heavenly signal that the world's waters moved in harmony with the gods. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Pytheas of Massalia, who lived around the 4th century BCE, was among the first known to note a direct link between the moon and the tides. He observed during his travels to the British Isles that the height of the tide seemed connected to the phases of the moon. While he did not understand the mechanics, the observation itself was remarkable. The Greeks, however, also clothed the tides in myth. The god Poseidon ruled the seas, and his moods could churn them into storms or calm them into glassy stillness. The connection between Poseidon and his brother Helios, the sun god, with Selene or Artemis, goddesses of the moon, was an elegant way of framing how the heavens controlled the restless sea. Across the Indian Ocean, in Hindu tradition, the tides were woven into the great cosmic order. The moon was linked to Soma, a deity tied to life, cycles, and nourishment. In Vedic texts, Soma was not only the moon, but also a divine elixir, one that sustained gods and mortals alike. The rise and fall of the tides could be seen as the world itself drinking in this rhythm. Here again, the moon was a vital part of life, regulating time, marking ritual calendars, and keeping the great machine of nature in motion. Further east in China, the moon was long associated with water and feminine energy. The lunar goddess Chang'e was a symbol of beauty and immortality, and the moon was linked to fertility, cycles of growth, and the balance of yin and yang. The tidal rhythms, though not fully explained, fit into this worldview of harmony between heaven and earth. Observers along the coasts of the South China Sea would have noticed the moon's influence and interpreted it as a natural expression of cosmic balance. The Maori people of New Zealand and other Polynesian navigators developed intricate systems of knowledge about the moon and the sea. For them, the moon was not only a celestial guide across the ocean, but also a regulator of tides and fishing. They paid close attention to lunar phases, noting when the tides would be higher or lower, and timing their activities accordingly. Though their explanations were framed in spiritual and cultural language, their observations were sharp, rooted in generations of lived experience with the water. In Northern Europe, Norse mythology saw the tides as the result of great cosmic struggles. One tale spoke of the giant Ran, who ruled the sea with her net, catching sailors and dragging them beneath the waves. Another spoke of Jarmungandr, the world serpent, who encircled Earth and stirred the seas when he moved. While the moon was not always directly mentioned, the sense that water was controlled by mighty beings fit neatly with the daily experience of tides shifting under forces that were beyond human control. In Japan, folklore also gave the moon a central place in the rhythms of life. The goddess Tsukuyomi was associated with the moon and order. Her presence was part of the cosmic balance maintained alongside her siblings Amaterasu, the sun, and Susanoo, the storm god. The ebb and flow of the seas were viewed as part of this divine framework. Japanese fishing communities paid close attention to the moon's phases, weaving its influence into practical knowledge as well as spiritual tradition. Long before science offered neat explanations with gravity and orbital mechanics, human beings stood on the edges of the sea and wondered why the waters came and went. To those early eyes, the connection between the moon and the tides must have seemed both obvious and mysterious. The moon appeared in the sky, and the waters responded, swelling and sinking with a rhythm as steady as breathing. Without equations or satellites, people explained this rhythm in the language they knew best: stories of gods, spirits, and cosmic forces. In Mesopotamia, one of the cradles of civilization, the moon was more than just a light in the night sky. It was personified as the god Sin or Nana, a powerful deity associated with cycles of time and fertility. The movement of water was easily woven into this divine rhythm. The rivers of the Tigris-Euphrates swelled and retreated with the seasons, and the moon became a clock in the heavens, a ruler of cycles, both earthly and celestial. To the people of this land, the waxing and waning of the lunar disk was as much a divine act as it was a natural one, a heavenly signal that the world's waters moved in harmony with the gods. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Pytheas of Massalia, who lived around the 4th century BCE, was among the first known to note a direct link between the moon and the tides. He observed during his travels to the British Isles that the height of the tide seemed connected to the phases of the moon. While he did not understand the mechanics, the observation itself was remarkable. The Greeks, however, also clothed the tides in myth. The god Poseidon ruled the seas, and his moods could churn them into storms or calm them into glassy stillness. The connection between Poseidon and his brother Helios, the sun god, with Selene or Artemis, goddesses of the moon, was an elegant way of framing how the heavens controlled the restless sea. Across the Indian Ocean in Hindu tradition, the tides were woven into the great cosmic order. The moon was linked to Soma, a deity tied to life, cycles, and nourishment. In Vedic texts, Soma was not only the moon, but also a divine elixir, one that sustained gods and mortals alike. The rise and fall of the tides could be seen as the world itself drinking in this rhythm. Here again, the moon was a vital part of life, regulating time, marking ritual calendars, and keeping the great machine of nature in motion. Further east in China, the moon was long associated with water and feminine energy. The lunar goddess Change was a symbol of beauty and immortality, and the moon was linked to fertility, cycles of growth, and the balance of yin and yang. The tidal rhythms, though not fully explained, fit into this worldview of harmony between heaven and earth. Observers along the coasts of the South China Sea would have noticed the moon's influence and interpreted it as a natural expression of cosmic balance. The Maori people of New Zealand and other Polynesian navigators developed intricate systems of knowledge about the moon and the sea. For them, the moon was not only a celestial guide across the ocean, but also a regulator of tides and fishing. They paid close attention to lunar phases, noting when the tides would be higher or lower, and timing their activities accordingly. Though their explanations were framed in spiritual and cultural language, their observations were sharp, rooted in generations of lived experience with the water. In Northern Europe, Norse mythology saw the tides as the result of great cosmic struggles. One tale spoke of the giant Ran who ruled the sea with her net, catching sailors and dragging them beneath the waves. Another spoke of Jarmungandr, the world serpent who encircled Earth and stirred the seas when he moved. While the moon was not always directly mentioned, the sense that water was controlled by mighty beings fit neatly with the daily experience of tides shifting under forces that were beyond human control. It is also a reminder that these ancient explanations were not just flights of fancy. They were based on careful observation and a deep need to understand and predict the world. People knew that the moon and the tide moved together with perfect timing. Then you look up, and the moon has changed shape in the sky from crescent to full to crescent again, and the tides shift in response. To see those patterns and not connect them would be more surprising than making the link. The explanation that gods commanded the waters or that the moon whispered to the sea was not only poetic but entirely reasonable for the knowledge of the time. The myths of tides tell us as much about human imagination as they do about the sea. They remind us that people have always sought meaning and patterns, that we have always tried to connect the heavens and the earth. While we now speak in the language of physics, the sense of wonder remains the same. The moon does command the waters. It does so with the invisible pull of gravity rather than the hand of a deity. But the poetry of the idea still lingers in every breaking wave. The moon does not just pull at the seas. It has long tugged at human imagination as well. Its phases offered one of the first reliable clocks in the sky, visible to everyone, no matter where they lived. Before the invention of mechanical timepieces, before sundials and hourglasses, People could look up and see the bright disk waxing and waning, and they could plan their lives around its steady rhythm. The moon became not only a guide to the tides, but a guide to time itself. A lunar cycle from one new moon to the next lasts about 29.5 days. That period is close enough to the length of a month that the very word month comes from the word moon. Early societies noticed how this cycle repeated with comforting regularity and built calendars around it. Farmers knew when to sow and harvest. Fishermen knew when the tides would swell, and navigators knew when to set sail, all by watching the shape of the moon. It was the original wall calendar, hung not on a wall, but in the endless dome of the night. As we have grown more technologically advanced, we have moved beyond the simple rhythms of the moon, yet its influence remains. Today, digital tidal charts forecast the tides with extraordinary precision, but their purpose is the same as the ancient knowledge: to keep sailors safe, to help fishermen make their catch, and to guide the commerce of the seas. The moon's patient role as a timekeeper is a quiet but powerful force, a reminder that some of the most enduring things in the universe are also the simplest. The tides are also a powerful force for life, shaping the very evolution of organisms that live on the edges of the land and sea. The strip of coastline between high and low tide, known as the intertidal zone, is one of the most challenging and dynamic environments on the planet. Here, life must cope with extremes of heat and cold, with constant changes in water and air, and with the relentless force of waves. It is a brutal but also incredibly fertile place, a crucible where life has perfected the art of survival. Imagine a crab that must retreat into a crevice as the tide goes out, or an algae that has learned to photosynthesize in both water and air. These are not just chance adaptations. They are the result of millions of years of evolution, driven by the steady push and pull of the moon. The intertidal zone is where many of life's great innovations were born. The first land creatures may have been fish that ventured out of the water at low tide, perhaps to escape predators or find new food sources. Over countless generations, their fins would have become limbs. Their gills would have adapted to breathe air, and they would have begun the long journey onto dry land. The tide, in this view, was not an obstacle but a pathway, a bridge between two worlds. It was the moon's steady command that created the conditions for life to explore new territories, to push beyond the boundaries of the sea. The intertidal zone is therefore a living museum, a place filled with the descendants of survivors, shaped by rhythms as old as the moon itself. At first glance, a tide pool might look like a quiet puddle left behind by the sea. Peer a little closer, however, and you will find an entire universe tucked into the rocky hollows. Tiny crabs scuttle among pebbles. Starfish cling firmly to the stones, and anemones sway their tentacles like flowers in an invisible breeze. The pool is a temporary refuge sealed off when the tide retreats and flooded again when the water returns. Each creature within it has evolved strategies to cope with sudden changes in temperature, salinity, and oxygen. Survival here requires resilience, flexibility, and sometimes a pinch of stubbornness. Take barnacles, for example. These small, unassuming crustaceans glue themselves to rocks, ships, and piers, living in a shell that can slam shut when exposed to air. When the tide rises, they open to filter food from the water, extending feathery appendages that look like tiny nets. When the tide falls, they close tightly to prevent dehydration, sealing themselves off from the sun and wind. The moon dictates their schedule, telling them when to eat and when to wait. Mussels, too, have mastered this rhythm. They cling to rocks in vast colonies, filtering the nutrient-rich water that floods in with the high tide. When the water recedes, they close their shells, conserving their energy and waiting for the sea to return. It is an efficient and ancient system, a testament to the power of adaptation. The moon's pull does not just feed the mussels. It feeds the whole ecosystem. By constantly mixing water, it distributes nutrients and oxygen, ensuring that life can thrive even in this harsh environment. Asterisk. The tidal cycle has also shaped the course of human history in profound and often surprising ways. From the earliest coastal settlements to the great voyages of discovery, the moon's pull has been a quiet but constant guide. Navigation was among the first sciences to be mastered, and reading the moon's influence was as crucial as reading the stars. The moon's sway over civilization also left marks in language and law. In some coastal communities, tidewater rites determined who could gather shellfish or harvest seaweed, often tied to specific phases of the moon. Market days and festivals aligned with spring tides when the sea revealed wide stretches of shore. Even in literature, the tide became a symbol of opportunity or inevitability. Shakespeare wrote of a tide in the affairs of men that, if taken at the flood, led to fortune. The metaphor is as clear as it is timeless. To succeed, one must know when the water is turning. Consider also how tides shaped architecture. Coastal towns built quays, docks, and even entire streets designed to withstand flooding twice a day. In Mont Saint-Michel in France, the sea rushes in with astonishing speed during high tide, cutting the abbey off from the mainland. The spectacle was both a natural wonder and a reminder that the moon's authority extended even into stone and mortar. Similarly, Venice was shaped not just by its canals, but by its struggle with tides, a challenge it continues to face today. The role of the moon in these stories is rarely mentioned outright. History books speak of kings, generals, merchants, and builders, but seldom of the silent partner in the sky who set the rhythm. Yet without the moon's pull, harbors would have functioned differently. Battles might have been lost, and trade might have followed other routes. The moon has been, in every sense, an unspoken ally and sometimes an unacknowledged adversary, shaping the fortunes of civilizations from the shadows. What is striking is the universality of it across cultures and centuries. From Viking raiders timing their coastal strikes to Chinese merchants sailing the South China Sea, from medieval pilgrims wading across tidal causeways to modern engineers designing tidal power plants, the knowledge of the tide has remained vital. The moon's pull has shaped not only the natural world, but also the human story, influencing choices great and small. To look back at this history is to realize that the tides are not just background scenery. They are a force of history itself, a hidden current running beneath the events we celebrate and remember. Harbors, trade routes, conquests, and revolutions have all been guided in part by the quiet hand of the moon. While it may never appear in the chronicles as a named participant, the moon has always been there, keeping time, pulling water, and reminding humanity that it does not move alone. Civilizations may rise and fall, but the moon remains above them, steady and impartial. Its partnership with Earth has been written into our harbors, our calendars, our victories, and even our failures. To see the tide today is to see the same rhythm that guided the first merchants, the first sailors, and the first soldiers who looked out at the water and made their plans. The moon, patient and constant, continues to be the silent strategist, the unseen merchant, and the eternal harbor master of human history. For as long as people have watched the sea rise and fall, there has been a need to predict its rhythm. Knowing when the water would come in and when it would recede meant survival, trade, and safety. Long before modern instruments, coastal communities developed methods to observe and anticipate the tides. And over time, these observations grew into one of the most reliable sciences of prediction. From marks on stone walls to the watchful eyes of satellites, the story of measuring tides is as much about human ingenuity as it is about the moon's pull. In the ancient world, the earliest tide measurements were often little more than careful memory. Fishermen knew that certain rocks would be covered at high water and exposed at low water, and they passed that knowledge along through generations. In Egypt, priests noticed that the flooding of the Nile was linked to lunar cycles. And although this was more seasonal than tidal, the connection between water levels and celestial bodies was firmly established. The Greeks and Romans also paid attention. In the 1st century BCE, the Roman author and naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote about how the tides seemed to follow the moon's movements and how they were strongest during the full and new phases. His observations were not precise, but they revealed that people were already watching the sea with scientific curiosity. One of the earliest known tools for tracking tides was the tide mill, used in Europe as early as the Middle Ages. These were water mills powered by the rise and fall of the tide, with basins that trapped water at high tide and released it to turn a wheel as the tide fell. To build and operate one required a decent understanding of local tidal patterns, which in turn demanded consistent observations. The millers may not have had modern charts, but they knew the rhythm of their harbors intimately. The final chapter of our story is not an end, but a long farewell. The moon, our faithful companion and the master of the tides, is slowly drifting away from us. Each year, it edges farther out into space, taking with it a fragment of the tide's strength. This quiet retreat, happening at a speed of just under 4 centimeters a year, will, over millions of years, reshape the relationship between Earth, its oceans, and the moon. The culprit is none other than the tides themselves. The friction of the oceans moving against the land as the moon pulls on them slows Earth's rotation, making our days ever so slightly longer. In return, that energy is transferred to the moon, giving it a gentle push outward in its orbit. This means that long ago, the moon was closer and the tides were far stronger. In the days of the early Earth, a day may have lasted only 6 to 10 hours, and the tides would have been colossal, reshaping coastlines with relentless energy. As the moon continues its retreat, the opposite will happen. Tidal ranges will shrink, and the grand spectacles we know today will become shadows of their former selves. In this long, slow process, the moon's pull will become softer, its once powerful grip slackening with distance. The lengthening of Earth's day is another consequence of this process. Ancient rocks and coral fossils preserve evidence that hundreds of millions of years ago, days were shorter, with about 400 days in a year. Far into the future, a single day may last more than a month by today's measure. Eventually, this process will reach a point of tidal locking where Earth always shows the same face to the moon. This final embrace is billions of years away, but it is strangely poetic, a final act in a cosmic dance. The shrinking of tides over time will also affect life, diminishing intertidal ecosystems and altering the course of species and evolution. We happen to live in an era when the moon is at just the right distance to create the tides we know, and even to make solar eclipses possible where the moon perfectly covers the sun's disk. In the distant future, those eclipses will disappear as the moon grows too small in the sky to block the sun. The tides will fade, and the cosmic partnership that has shaped so much of Earth's history will enter a quieter phase. But even as the moon drifts away, it leaves a record written in stone. Tidal patterns preserved in ancient rocks tell the story of shorter days and stronger tides long ago. The moon's long goodbye is part of that endless transformation, a cosmic reminder that stability is always temporary and that impermanence is the rule. The moon's pull on the oceans has therefore become a pull on the imagination as well. It stirs not only the water, but the mind, shaping the way we write, paint, sing, and dream. Science explains the mechanics, but imagination gives the tides meaning, transforming the simple rise and fall of water into a symbol that has endured for centuries. The tide is not only the moon's gift to the seas, but also the moon's gift to art, an eternal rhythm that continues to inspire as surely as it continues to flow. For as long as humans have set sail, the tides have been both companion and challenge. The sea is never a static surface, and those who ventured onto it quickly learned that understanding the rhythm of the moon was as essential as reading the stars. Without the tides, many of the great voyages of discovery, trade, and migration would have unfolded very differently. The history of navigation and exploration is inseparable from the knowledge of how the waters rise and fall. The first great navigators to master the Pacific Ocean were the Polynesians. Long before Europeans crossed the Atlantic, Polynesian sailors had developed a sophisticated system of ocean knowledge that blended observation, memory, and oral tradition. They did not rely on compasses or charts, but on an intimate familiarity with the movements of the sea and sky. Tides were part of this system. Knowing when a lagoon would be open to canoes, or when strong currents would flow between islands made the difference between success and disaster. The moon cycle was carefully observed, its phases marking when voyages should begin and when fishing would be most fruitful. A Polynesian navigator could read the subtle cues of swell and current, linking them to tidal cycles and using them to cross thousands of kilometers of open water with astonishing accuracy. Elsewhere in the world, coastal peoples developed their own tidal lore. In the Indian Ocean, Arab traders sailing their dhows timed departures to coincide with favorable monsoon winds, but also paid attention to tidal currents in harbors and straits. Even today, modern sailors navigate shallow waters with electronic charts that display not only depth, but also real-time tidal data. Yet, the principle remains unchanged. Every voyage from a fishing boat leaving a small harbor to a container ship crossing oceans depends on the rhythm set by the moon. Looking back, it is remarkable to realize how much of human history on the seas was guided by this silent partner. The spread of Polynesian culture across the Pacific, the flourishing of trade across the Indian Ocean, the voyages of discovery that linked continents, all of them were shaped by tides. The moon's gravitational pull may be invisible, but its role in navigation and exploration is written into the maps and routes of history. The story of exploration is not just about daring captains or sturdy ships. It is also about timing a departure to the rising tide, about slipping into a harbor when the moon says it is safe, about trusting a rhythm that has guided sailors for thousands of years. The great voyages of the past were carried not only by wind and courage, but also by the steady breathing of the sea. Asterisk, asterisk. The moon hangs above us like a lantern, steady and patient, watching over the restless waters of the earth. For all of human history, it has been the silent guardian of the sea, pulling and releasing, guiding the tides in a rhythm as old as the planet itself. To stand on the shore and listen to the waves creeping forward, and then sliding back again, is to hear the heartbeat of the world set by the hand of the moon. This rhythm is not only physical, but deeply poetic, a reminder that even in silence, the cosmos composes music. There is something profoundly calming about the certainty of tides. The sun may blaze and set, storms may howl, empires may rise and fall, but the waters will always come in and go out. Twice each day, the moon whispers across the oceans, and they respond with a bowing of their heads, a surge toward the land, and then a retreat. It is a dialogue without words, a conversation of pull and surrender. This constancy makes the tide one of the planet's most meditative forces, a reminder that change itself can be steady, that movement can be predictable, that time itself can be rhythmic. The heart is a useful metaphor. Just as blood pulses through the body with each beat, so too does water flow across the earth with each cycle of the tide. Every coast is a vein, every ocean a chamber, the whole planet breathing in tune with the moon. When the tide comes in, it is as though Earth takes a deep inhale. When it falls away, the exhale follows. Life has evolved to this rhythm. Crabs scuttle with the receding water. Birds feed on the flats when the tide is low, and fish ride the rising waves into estuaries. Even the timing of coral spawning or the hatching of turtles align with the moon's pull. The tide is not just Earth's heartbeat. It is also its metronome-setting tempo for the dance of life. This relationship has always invited reflection. Poets and philosophers have long gazed at the moon and the sea and seen more than mechanics. They have seen companionship. The sea is restless, vast, and often wild. The moon is calm, steady, and remote. Together, they create balance. The one anchoring the other, the one shaping the other's identity. Without the moon, the sea would still move, but it would lack the deep rhythm that has defined it for billions of years. The moon, in turn, would still shine, but it would lack the great mirror of water reflecting its light and answering its call. There is also humility in this connection. We are small creatures standing on the edge of a vast ocean, staring at a sphere almost 400,000 kilometers away. And yet, we are bound to both by the same thread of gravity. The pull that moves the seas also moves us, tugging subtly at our bodies, influencing our calendars, our myths, our art. It is a reminder that we are not separate from the universe, but part of it, drawn into its rhythms, whether we notice them or not. The poetry of tides lies in their duality. They are both gentle and immense, both predictable and powerful. The same tide that leaves seashells glistening on a beach can also flood cities when combined with storms. The same moon that inspires lovers and artists is also the author of erosion, pulling at cliffs until they crumble into the surf. To see tides only as danger is to miss their beauty. To see them only as beauty is to forget their power. They embody the paradox of nature itself, nurturing, destructive, constant, and changeable all at once. At night, when the moon is full and bright, the tide feels almost ceremonial. The sea gleams silver, as though dressed in robes of light, and the waves march in solemn procession. At new moon, when the sky is dark and the moon is invisible, the tide still arrives. A silent pulse in the night, a confirmation that its power is not dependent on what we can see, but on what we cannot. The tide, in its quiet inevitability, is one of the universe's most beautiful and enduring rhythms. It is a song without sound, a clock without hands, a patient force that has shaped our world for billions of years. So, when you next find yourself by the sea, whether at high tide or low, remember that you are standing in a place where science, history, myth, and poetry meet. You are at the edge of the world's great breath, a rhythm set by a distant silver sphere, and a reminder that even the most ordinary moments are part of a cosmic dance. It is a comforting thought, a gentle and constant truth written into the sand and spoken in the waves, a final whisper from the moon.